Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's VinPF, and on today's episode we're going to be covering something a little Irish. Now, I've been guilty of not covering many Irish on this channel. I tried to cover a fair few in 2020 and kind of got maybe 10 or so done in the year. I have to say it's something that I don't typically buy. It's a flavour profile that, although as we might see today, that I find very drinkable, it's not one that I find particularly exciting. This kind of triple distilled nature, which is very typical among Irish whiskey, although not completely mutually exclusive. I find it just a little light, and I prefer big, bolder flavours, I have to say. I'm more into my kind of bourbons and my peated stuff. But that said, it does have a place on my shelf, and I do have some Irish whiskey to cover today, although I have to say this is my only bottle right now, and only bottle in the queue coming up as well, so I probably should get some more at some point. This one, however, is a little different. And today we have the Sexton, as you can see here. Now, aside from the fact it's a black bottle, and if you watch this channel, you know I've got a bit of a bugbear about this sort of thing, but hold this one up to the light and you can just about see through it. It's actually brown, really dark brown. So I'm not too concerned about that. You guys know if you watch my channel that I really don't like opaque bottles. I think they're a bit pointless. Now, a couple of things that we do know about this. We know, of course, that it's Irish. We know it's triple distilled, like many Irish whiskies are. We know it's been distilled in County Antrim, so we've got a pretty good guess that it's Bushmills. Pretty good guess. Let's say it's almost definitely Bushmills. Now, where we get a difference here from traditional Irish whiskies, and again, not a mutually exclusive thing, but they tend to say on the front, single pot still whiskey. Now, this is generally because they, although many whiskies, especially Scotch, is made with 100% malted barley or some malted barley elements and other grains, Irish whiskey differs in fact that they use some non-malted barleys in there as well. Now, sometimes, of course, they'll use grains, other grains like many other whiskies do. This one is a single malt whiskey, so there's no unmalted barley in there, there's no grain whiskey in there, it's been distilled in pot stills, there's no column whiskey stuff going in there, it's just a straight up single malt whiskey. We also know that this is aged in sherry casks, Oloroso, if you want to be dead on the money with that. But we don't know how many years it's been aged for. It's almost certainly non-chill filtered and almost certainly added colour. This sort of thing here, very much added colour. But although we know it's Bushmills, it isn't going to be like the standard Bushmills you get because that's a blended whiskey. It has some grain whiskey in there as well. Of course, Bushmills does release some age statement single malt whiskies as well of different cask types, so we might see something similar in there, but you can bet that this probably isn't aged particularly highly. I don't know if it's 3 years or not. I severely doubt it's anything above 10 years because they would have said it on the label and charged a little bit more for it. Talking of price, this one tends to fluctuate quite heavily, I find. You can get this as cheap as 25 quid in the UK and as expensive as something like £35, which is probably a little much, I'm going to say ahead of time on that one. That's a lot of wittering I've done about this particular whiskey. Let's get into the glass and see if it's actually any good. Now, we've mentioned colour already, but we'll let you have another look at that. Almost definitely added colour on that thing. Let's have a go on the nose. Now, on the nose, it actually got quite a full nose to it. It's lots of honeys, lots of caramels. Oddly, I'm not getting too much of those sherry notes. We often talk about things like dried fruits and things like that on when you get a sherry-influenced whiskey. I don't get too much of that, so this would definitely confuse me in a blind lineup. I also get a lot of kind of hay and straw-like notes off of it. And weirdly, I get a kind of smell that I normally get off a kind of grain whiskey. So again, would confuse me on a blind lineup. Let's try on the palate. Okay. So initial mouthfeel is a little bit disappointing compared to the nose. It's quite watery, not very viscous, very heavy on the peppery spice, which I quite like, I have to say. Not getting a lot of that translation over from the nose, those honeys, those caramels, nor those kind of grain-like elements either. There isn't like a hell of a lot going on the palate-wise, I have to admit. Very underwhelming, in fact. The finish is actually surprisingly long, probably medium-ish, very peppery. Interesting, indeed. Interesting. Definitely a winner on the nose. It's good, a decent nose, but probably a little bit poor on the palate, I have to say, for my personal preferences. And finish is pretty good. Now, we're talking about price. Now, it depends on how much you're paying for this, is depending on whether I could recommend it to you or not. As always, you have to include price on this thing. It's all well and good me kind of giving my opinions on whether I think it's good or not, and if we're going on that alone, I'd probably leave it. If you can get this for 25 quid or less, then it's not going to hurt having it around, that's for sure. There's going to be better whiskies in your cabinet, I imagine. If you're paying upwards of £35 for it, it's probably one to leave, because you can get way better whiskies for the same price, or even just a little bit less than this one here. You're kind of paying for a bit of fancy marketing. And really, I mean, you're talking about Bushmills here, right? So I've got nothing against Bushmills. I enjoy a bit of Bushmills for a cheap whiskey, but the standard Bushmills is probably a 10 quid cheaper than this, even at the cheapest. So, and as I said earlier, it's not going to be the same whiskey. They do different things. So you're not going to get the same experience with the Bushmills and this next to each other, or even the Black Bush for that matter, which is a bit of sherry influence. Yeah, so again, it really depends on what price you can get this for, whether you should look at it or not. Have a look at that. If it still piques your interest, please do go ahead. It'll be perfect for kind of mixers and even just casual sipping. I'm definitely going to enjoy drinking this for sure, but would I buy it again? Probably not. It's almost certainly got added colour and almost certainly got non-chill Oh dear, fucking eye. It's almost certainly non-chill filtered.